March 2nd, 2025. The final minutes before the operation begins. Equipment checked. Oxygen tanks are in order. Paratroopers, Marines, the Assault Brigade, veterans, Ahmed, and volunteers descend underground in small groups. The whole shot. Here is the mind stream.
Here is the mind stream. Here is the mind stream. Is repeated in juicy.
Several hundred heroes must accomplish the impossible. Travel 15 kilometers underground, emerge behind enemy lines, and hold a circular defense until reinforcements arrive. Essentially, it's a one-way ticket.
Well, it's an old love. We'll be moving to the side. We'll be paying off the fatness.
A narrow gas pipeline. Its diameter is less than 1.5 meters. Traces of methane penetrate even through respirators. Water and food are at a minimum. After a grueling march, they waited for orders for another 4 days. 2 guys who were in our network joined. On March 7th, the order comes, and the soldiers surface. Deep behind enemy lines, captured by Ukrainian terrorists, they dry out. Operation. Hey.
Are you without Russian sewing? I am. Go, drink, vodka. Vodka. Yes, yes, yes. Schnapps. Schnapps, dude. Cool schnapps.
That's how the brave Ukrainian soldiers with SS insignia on their helmets entered Kursk land in August of the year 24. They entered with laughter, curses, and merriment. They found it amusing to mock a 74-year-old pensioner who told them he was lost. And for 5 nights, he had to sleep under the open sky.
Russian Ivan. Hey, Russian Ivan. How's life? How's life, Russian Ivan?
In my life, they will pay.
Look at these cheerful faces. We've all seen this before. More than 80 years have passed. Technologies have changed. But the fate of the Nazis has not changed. The invasion of the armed forces of Ukraine into the Kursk region began on the night of August 5th to 6th, 2024. After a targeted artillery barrage, NATO equipment moved in for the breakthrough. German tanks, Leopards, American heavy IFVs, Bradleys, with engineering plows. These were elite assault brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces, including those trained under the supervision of NATO instructors.
It can be stated as another fact that at least 30 to 40% of the initial invasion group, which was deployed against the Kursk region in August 1924, were foreign citizens. Well, analyzing. By state affiliation, we probably won't do that, but our servicemen have repeatedly mentioned that French and Polish were heard in radio communications.
In the first stage, the armed forces of Ukraine involved more than 11,000 soldiers and hundreds of armored vehicles for the invasion. Civilians who tried to leave the city by car were shot at.
They intimidated the civilian population, were noted for torture and war crimes. I believe that all these facts will be meticulously investigated by our law enforcement and special services, and each will be duly punished.
Those who hid in their homes were forcibly taken out, put into trucks, and taken to the territory of Ukraine. The armed forces of Ukraine kidnapped more than 1,000 civilians. These are footage from the first days of the invasion. Men in civilian clothes are thrown into an army truck like cattle and beaten with rifles in the truck bed.
One of the participants in this footage was lucky. The terrorist Vitaly Panchenko from Vinnytsia ended up captured.
He was sentenced to 15 years in prison by the court. I was just supposed to be treated well. By these civilians, I hit him on the shoulder, so. In civilian. He can't get into this battery. I don't know. I told you. I don't know why I did it.
Our soldiers did not execute Panchenko, even when they found this recording on his phone. But the Ukrainian soldiers themselves were not so humane to the civilian population.
I settled in.
caught in the area and caught in the area and shot.
This is a horrifying confession. Back in January of 25, it was made by a captured senior soldier of the 92nd Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In the village of Ruskaya Porekne in the Kursk region, investigators found the bodies of 22 murdered civilians. At that time, no one yet understood the scale of the war crimes committed by the Ukrainian army on our land. But the more villages our soldiers liberated, the more they were guilty of murder. The clearer it became. From the Nazis who came to us 84 years ago, the servicemen in the armed forces of Ukraine are not much different.
It's a terrible hatred for the Russian world. Such an animal. In other words, I can't explain it. And of course, the political leadership that pushes the military of foreign states to commit these crimes.
Kershinos, Genshinos, Chertovskaya River. 1103, look, what happened to them?
These horrifying scenes with pensioners, shot not just anywhere, but right in the church, won't be shown on Ukrainian television, just like with this disabled person, killed right in his bed. And between the crimes, Ukrainian soldiers recorded these kinds of funny, as they thought, videos from Russian stores.
I don't know. Look at this, Ribmir! I immediately took the corner.
The village of Malaya Lakhnia, north of Sudza, became a symbol of the resilience of Russian soldiers. In August of 24, soldiers of the 9th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the North Troop Group took up defense in the 11th Women's Correctional Colony. Before that, they evacuated all civilians to the rear. For 12 days, our guys repelled attacks. In the armed forces of Ukraine, they repeatedly called artillery fire on themselves. The enemy lost about 10 BMPs and 100 soldiers here. The defense was led by Lieutenant Colonel Sergei Chebnev. He died during a counterattack but ensured the escape of his soldiers from encirclement. For his heroism, the battalion commander was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of Russia.
A true battalion commander, a true officer, a true leader was lost. And above all, a true human being.
While our soldiers were holding back attacks in the armed forces of Ukraine from the very first days of the Ukrainian invasion, the evacuation of civilians began from the border areas of the Kursk region. In total, our soldiers and volunteers evacuated more than 120,000 people, but not everyone managed to leave. Not everyone made it in time.
Everything was lost.
We were evacuated, but it was a very rushed evacuation. They were evacuating their parents and children.
This man from the occupied Sudza was so convinced he wouldn't survive that he wrote a farewell letter to his loved ones on his passport. Hunger is overwhelming, and when the frosts begin, it will be a real challenge. Please forgive me if anything is wrong. Goodbye, dear relatives. I'm going to my mother. I'm not with him today. We have no means here. I saw that he doesn't want to eat. For the operation in the Kursk region, the command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine involved 16 brigades, plus the so-called Georgian National Legion, the Alpha SBU Special Forces, and the 8th Special Operations Regiment. As it became known later, it was the Special Forces who first crossed the border of the Kursk region and paved the way for the army units. But they also suffered significant losses in the process.
These were Ranger regiments, Special Forces regiments. They are, truly, the elite equipped in a special manner in the Special Forces of the United Kingdom and the United States of America.
The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service reported that the plan for the invasion of the Kursk region was prepared with the participation of the intelligence services of the USA, Britain, and Poland. At the same time, American intelligence passed on to the Ukrainian general satellite information about our defense line in the border areas.
The Ukrainian army is almost entirely dependent on the sensitive information provided to them by American overseers or partners, whatever you want to call them. That is satellite reconnaissance using heavy long-range drones, electronic intelligence,
The attack was highly coordinated. High-precision HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems struck Russian positions.
HIMARS, they are, in fact, not so. To be continued. Often and not without purpose. And they were used mainly, and this was mentioned, not by Ukrainian calculations, but by calculations of foreign specialists.
The command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine managed to capture 1,268 square kilometers of Russian territory, but the operation failed. The main target was the Kursk nuclear power plant. Essentially, the terrorists wanted to seize a nuclear bomb and start dictating their terms. In these frames, a column of 19 armored vehicles of the Armed Forces of Ukraine is moving from here to the city of Kurchatov, where the Kursk nuclear power plant is located. Only 2 Russian BTRs destroyed an entire column of NATO armored vehicles and several dozen soldiers of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
The objectives that the enemy set for themselves at the time of the invasion in August of the 24th year, they were unable to achieve. That is to say, this is, at the very least, necessary. They needed to capture 3 district centers, and the main objective was still the Kursk nuclear power plant in the city of Kurchatov. Because we quickly oriented ourselves and gave the enemy a worthy response, we contained that region of incursion into the Kursk region and fired, establishing the line of combat contact with the enemy. Things immediately did not go as planned for the enemy.
In just 1 month, the Ukrainian armed forces lost 17,000 soldiers killed and wounded, 130 tanks, and almost 1,000 armored vehicles of various types in the Kursk direction. In 3 months, the Russian army regained control of 40% of the captured territory.
The enemy undertook truly large-scale defensive construction, digging fortifications not only in populated areas. It's always easier in populated areas. There are buildings, there are basements. There are things to hold on to during defense, both active and passive. But the enemy also dug in open fields. In forest belts they built, accordingly, trenches, bunkers, a network of underground communications. For this, yes, they indeed brought in a lot of equipment. Including using equipment they managed to capture in the Kursk region. Already.
The attack on the Kursk region from a strategic operation to capture the Kursk nuclear power plant turned into an operation to save Zelensky's personal image. After all, he attracted the best forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine for it, which were meanwhile so needed in other directions.
In the Kursk direction in Kursk, the elite fought. In general, the best units and assault brigades and special operations forces, specifically the 73rd and other forces, among others.
By January 17th, about 460 square kilometers of territory remained under the control of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region out of the 1260 captured. The losses of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reached 44,000 people over the entire duration of the operation. By the end of February, our unit was very close. They approached the Sumy highway, which was used to supply the entire Ukrainian troop grouping in the Kursk region. It was taken under tight control not only by artillery, but also by FPV drones. Ukrainian soldiers dubbed it the Road of Death. And it's not surprising, considering that there are now more than 300 units of destroyed Ukrainian armed forces equipment on it.
Mostly, the equipment was foreign. By the way, again, I'll refer to the words of the chief of the German staff, who reported to the president about almost 400 destroyed tanks. The tanks were mostly of foreign models, but also are quite old models. They boasted a lot about their Abrams, and I came across several reports that not only Abrams tanks, even direct hit, we still moved on our own. Now it's visible on the road, the tanks. Abrams and other lines of tanks are along the road. Countless armored vehicles. Other equipment, which, if not destroyed, got stuck in the spring. Thaw.
This is not Earth.
Russian units slowly and methodically pushed out the entrenched militants from the Kursk region. But the real breakthrough happened in early March. That's when the unique Operation Potok was carried out. The very same, now legendary, incursion into the rear of the Ukrainian army.
Through the underground gas pipe.
If there's no gas in the pipe, then there. The address of the special forces. That is, these memes started. And why? I discovered even before the publication of all these official series in our media that the Ukrainians provided the information in such a way that yes, they noticed that there was someone in the pipe, everyone there perished. Well, it turned out to be lies and just Ukrainian propaganda, nothing more.
Unfortunately, I was not a participant in the brilliant PUS operation, but from open sources, indeed, it is unique. Unique in that it is an example of how people, military personnel with, those who sufficiently possess civilian professions, manage to produce excellent cooperation.
We learned the details of this unique operation from the first PUS, from those who prepared it for several weeks, and those who took a huge risk by going through the pipe to meet the enemy. See, Ares, in a minute. Strike drones that cannot be shot down. What technologies are successfully used in the Russian army?
Heavy confrontation of both ours and the enemy's, specifically the UAV calculations. The best of the best are gathered here.
Almost 100 flights a day. Is this really what the war of the future looks like?
Tanks, IFVs, infantry, vehicles, birds in general. There were few birds.
Fire, water, and gas pipes. An incredible march throw spanning 15 kilometers. Are there any analogs to this feat in history?
Task operation, special operation. Ready? Sailors, let's start moving. Sailors.
How to defeat the enemy not by numbers, but by skill, we'll tell you in a minute in the next part of our film. March 2025. The Russian flag is being raised in the main square of the city of Sudza. 7 long months. Everything led to this important event. Our troops took control of a key VCU outpost in the Kursk region.
Listen, paratroopers. Groups are working together. Everyone who participated in the liberation, the essence is the same. Igor, one army.
The Ukrainian command claims an organized withdrawal of their troops. But judging by these shots, the personnel is fleeing in panic. How did Russian assault troops manage to break through the strong enemy defenses in the Kursk region in less than a week, which had been built here for almost half a year? The Special Operation Potok is not just a story about the heroic underground landing of our troops. It's a whole set of tactical decisions. A chain of interconnected actions that need to be considered separately for each link. The first serious crack in the defense of the Ukrainian armed forces appeared on the southern flank. Russian troops are pushing the enemy back, breaking through the central artery of the Ukrainian occupiers. The Unikivka Sudza route.
The Ukrainian armed forces used it to deliver ammunition, food, equipment, and conduct troop rotations. They decided to block the route using drones. A heavy confrontation ensued between both our forces and the enemy, specifically involving UAV units. The best of the best are gathered here. Let's say, both the enemy's and ours. There were competitions in the Donetsk direction, but here, in terms of seriousness, it's already reached the next level. Drones on optical fibers still remain, essentially, a stumbling block for the Ukrainians, which they have yet to figure out how to combat. It is absolutely impervious to anything. The only thing that can interrupt the flight of such a drone is mechanical destruction. But to hit it when it is flying, at extremely low altitudes and at maximum speed is practically impossible. This very fiber optic trail that follows it is so thin that it is impossible to distinguish or break it. Many say it will get caught and fall, but no, it is designed in such a way that it unwinds as needed. It simply Falls like a spider web, not slowing down this projectile that is heading towards the target. It is not susceptible to electronic jamming, as I already mentioned. The only way to destroy it is through firepower.
FPV drones made up the main strike force in this direction. Under the cover of their work, it is easier for the assault troops to approach the enemy's fortifications.
I will continue to explain what your instructions will be. Set up a post at the intersect. At the turn, make sure to set up a post. Whoever is leading the first formation, secure yourselves, go through the groves, lie down, take cover on the road, opposite those machine guns. They won't be able to shoot through you anyway. They don't have any birds, no mortars, no assistance.
The operator with the call sign Vinikers demonstrates various modifications of drones and kamikaze. The key among them are drones on fiber optics.
And all the main enemy targets were destroyed. I mean high-tech NATO armored vehicles, high-tech. Artillery combat systems were destroyed precisely by these drones.
The main advantage of fiber optic drones is their absolute disregard for interference caused by enemy electronic warfare systems. Judging by these frames, modern electronic warfare stations on enemy equipment are unable to stop our drones. A series of such strikes has turned the road of life for the armed forces of Ukraine into a real hell. Vinikers recalls, there were episodes when it was necessary to perform about 100 sorties in one day. The result of such work is dozens of burned out equipment on the roadside. Enemy forces are in confusion.
Based on combat experience, in this area, the armed forces of Ukraine expect a concentration of forces for a further strike from our military. But the Marines from the 810th Brigade perform an unpredictable maneuver. The initial task was, as they say, to disrupt the enemy's logistics. Thus, we, in addition to moving along the state border, went strictly west and created, as they say, an operational encirclement. That's how they describe it. As a result, they immediately realized that there was no way back, and they needed to make a quick getaway.
It's a standard situation. When they retreat almost immediately, completely. That is, they leave 1, 2, or 3 positions to buy time, so to speak, mainly leaving machine gun positions, kind of, well, 2. It was more effective to just buy time to withdraw as many of their forces to a safe distance as possible.
The enemy forces are blocked from the south and west. And at this moment, the commander of the North Troop Group launches the most daring special operation, now known to everyone as Stream.
The task of the operation, special operation.
Ready? Operation. Let's start moving.
Operation. The tactics of using these kinds of hidden gardens. Trenches, it's not new. The fact is, even in ancient times, especially in the Middle Ages, when fortresses were difficult to capture, they were used. These underground tunnels, that's the expression that appeared, quietly and stealthily. This sap, as it's called, is a trench, or a dugout towards the enemy, which allowed, or to place some means under the walls to blow them up, or to end up again in the center of the fortress. Thanks to these underground tunnels, but without a comprehensive approach, without, to be continued, complete sets of measures, as mentioned in various directions, so that the enemy wouldn't even think that our armies, our glorious fighters could enter through a pipe.
Hundreds of Russian fighters break into small groups and move to the enemy's rear through the gas pipeline. 15 kilometers underground in a confined and narrow space. Lack of light, oxygen deficiency, and the pungent smell of methane. Unbearable conditions and real trials for our servicemen.
In conditions of low oxygen content in the atmosphere, a
person begins to experience oxygen deprivation. Additionally, methane comes into play, because methane poisoning also affects the psyche, the nerves. That is, accordingly, with low oxygen content, you could start having hallucinations. Some guys saw cats and dogs running across.
In addition to this, there was dampness and high condensation. The communications officer with the call sign Croat had to walk the entire pipeline route twice to ensure uninterrupted communication for his comrades. The last kilometer, admittedly, was incredibly difficult.
Psychologically, the tunnel doesn't scare me, but physically, it's tough. Because the floors are constantly slippery due to moisture and condensation, so you end up completely soaked. I walked 50 meters, rested for a minute, walked another 50 meters, and rested for another minute. My knees hurt so much that I could only walk 3 meters at a time. It took me 3 hours to walk 800 meters.
The preparation for the strike behind enemy lines took about 3 weeks. It all started with opening an inactive gas pipeline. Then they began to extract the remaining natural gas from it. When the conditions in the pipe became acceptable, the final planning of the main assault phase of the underground landing began. Journalists from our channel managed to get to the entrance of that very pipe to personally assess. What difficulties did the Russian servicemen face right at the beginning?
I'm 1.93 meters tall, and I can only go about 200 meters. Of course, my back is giving out. How is it to walk? 15 kilometers underground? Well, the first meter in the pipe. Here it is, the head hitting. To be continued.
15 kilometers. Doesn't seem like a difficult distance for experienced fighters. However, the conditions of movement themselves were extremely challenging. Inside the pipe, there's condensation. Its diameter is less than 1.5 meters, so you can't stand up straight. Plus, there's the burden of gear and provisions. Thank you. Fighters arrived at the entry point and descended into the pipe in small groups at timed intervals, so the enemy wouldn't notice excessive activity. Thus, the deployment of the troops into the pipe stretched over 4 days. But, as it turned out, when emerging to the surface, the Russian military had to urgently change. The tactics?
Initially, our task was, as the task was outlined, the plan was that we all had to be in strong bandages so that when we jumped into the enemy's club, at least for a while, for a few hours, to introduce a moment of disorganization in their ranks. But we didn't take into account one thing, that after going through this difficult path, we all look like Somali pirates, like residents of Congo and Zimbabwe. And the bandages, in principle, were not needed by anyone because it was already clear who was friend and who was foe.
A few hundred exhausted fighters against a multi-thousand grouping of enemy troops. The daring maneuver disarmed the armed forces of Ukraine. The defense on the northern flanks began to collapse rapidly.
They are being swept away because the fall of the front line is like a collapse of a domino house. Yes, one flank gave way, the other flank gave way. All these pockets of resistance are being swept away. It's hopeless because you can't retreat, you can't go to the rear, and reinforcements won't come. They try, yes, to hold on, to stand to the last. The number of prisoners is not even a question anymore. Many are surrendering.
Tanks, IFVs, infantry, vehicles, birds in the sky. There were a lot of birds. The sky was filled.
Operation Flow, experts are sure, will definitely become a separate chapter in history textbooks on the liberation of the Kursk region and in military studies textbooks.
The risk. We took upon ourselves all this danger and uncertainty we faced. It really had an effect. We truly risked our lives, really took a risk. It had an effect because we, by infiltrating the enemy's ranks with forces of several hundred people. Sowed great panic among them.
They didn't understand where they came from what sky they fell. By the way, the president noted that most of our units belong to airborne assault brigades, and they are deployed through a tube originally. Usually, we are used to deployments being done by air, with parachutes or by sea. Like the Marines, well, it turns out you can also do it this way, through a tube via underground passages.
A fighter from the veteran assault squad with the call sign, Fantasist, is one of the engineers who created a network of tunnels for the covert transfer of forces to the gas pipeline itself. We often had to work at night to avoid being spotted by enemy drones.
Physically, it will fall. On. What job? That is, the bird is flying. Its danger is here. They didn't drop anything. No boss. Nothing.
And here's the main door that opened Operation Flow to the whole world. This is what started the entire operation. One entrance, followed by an underground passage. Entrances are 500 meters underground, with various depths from 1 to 4 meters. With pipes, double, triple layers. Underground passages, living quarters, utility areas. And further, the fleet itself directly.
Something similar was already under Avdiivka a year ago. Back then, fighters from the same assault brigade veterans executed a clever tactical maneuver. They attacked the enemy by passing through an underground pipe 3.5 kilometers long.
The enemy built Avdiivka, you know, it was something. Similar to a line, an impregnable line of defense. They had been building it since 2014. There was so much concrete there. The enemy was 100% sure that we would never break through this defense. In the middle of the defense, there was an abandoned water pipe, which, as I understand, was either a drainage or perhaps some kind of ancient water conduit. Our troops, the guys, cleaned it out. It was about 1.5 to 2 kilometers, and they advanced. They practically burst into the area in the same way and allowed the defenses to be breached.
To clear the passage and remain unnoticed by the enemy, the sounds of underground work were drowned out using artillery. The defendants acted in exactly the same way.
Here, it's 15 kilometers. I think this will truly go down in the annals of military history. It will be highlighted as a method of breaking through defenses, probably, someday in military institutions and academies.
Less than a day after the pipeline landing, the enemy front in the Kursk region crumbled. One after another, videos started appearing online showing the Russian flag in liberated settlements. And such recordings began to appear at a record speed. Ukrainian soldiers were fleeing too quickly or surrendering. How much Western equipment did the fleeing invaders abandon? Is there much of it left in Ukrainian depots? War, nonsense, maneuvers are what matter. And why did the Ukrainian commander SYRSKY call the retreat from Kursk maneuvers? What's next? Will there be an offensive on the Sumy region? And what is the reason for the incredible cruelty of Ukrainian soldiers towards civilians? Breaking through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine in the rear, Russian units. In the first day of the operation, they advanced on the front line, liberating important settlements such as Cherkaskia, Porognia, Kositsa, Pravda, and Martinovka. Mykolovka. In the morning, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that since the beginning of the operation, 12 settlements and more than 100 square kilometers of the Kursk region have been liberated.
The immediate task, the ultimate goal, is to defeat the enemy. Entrenched in the territory come on, come on, come on. The Kursk region. Completely liberate the territory of the Kiev region. Preserving the expensive NATO equipment, which the Kiev regime had been begging from Western partners for so long, also failed. The fact is, a day before the start of Operation Stream, the Russian aerospace forces disabled all key communication facilities between the settlements. Bridges were blown up. So they had to retreat, abandoning their combat equipment. Our troops successfully advanced and destroyed the enemy. However, the situation is even more interesting in the Sumy region of Ukraine, which borders Russia.
Experts note that a large amount of military equipment is based there, which the militants will not be able to transport quickly when the infantry flees. Therefore, the Russian armed forces have a great chance to destroy it. Along with it, the specialists who provide technical maintenance for these machines. Overall, according to experts' estimates, Kiev has paid an exorbitantly high price for the Kursk adventure. Almost 20,000 militants, about, for 100 tanks, 2,000 armored vehicles, and 540 artillery pieces. However, these numbers continue to grow.
I know how fast they are fleeing. Simply, I talked to my brother with a veteran dude. They say, we are calmly driving in here. We drove in on buggies. We took photos near the grocery store. They say, Will, not for long. Your music was playing, guys.
The task was to mine the road, cut off the enemy, and fortify. Along the road there were many people, as well as groups. We moved out in a group of 7 people, a reconnaissance and sabotage group. We mined the road, cut off the enemy. We also adjusted the fire.
The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Alexander Sursky, called everything happening in the Kursk border area timely measures for maneuvering Ukrainian units to advantageous defensive positions, and thus confirmed the retreat of the troops. From here to the border with the Sumy region, it's about 9 kilometers along the highway. These are exclusive shots from the streets of the destroyed city. Not a single building remains intact. The city, where almost 5,000 people once lived, has been burned to the ground. And now it's not safe to walk through here. Enemy shells are constantly landing. It has been long and difficult. 7 months. The city has been subjected to widespread looting by marauders, both Ukrainian soldiers and mercenaries. Civilians who didn't manage to evacuate from Sudza were subjected to abuse. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation still needs to establish all the facts of the war crimes committed in the city by the occupiers. Military investigators have already begun their work. It's difficult to say when civilians will be able to return here. The reason is the constant threat of shelling and raids from the enemy side. Yes, and the streets of Sudza and other settlements in the area are literally littered with unexploded shells and cluster munitions.
They still remain. Shelter. Mines are still not cleared. So be careful. Be careful on the roads. We will be clearing them. We will still be clearing them. Everything is ahead.
We are moving another 3 meters to the side. And here is a bell. Unexploded. Naturally, we won't touch it right now. In the coming days, we will dispose of it. But for now, it remains there. The shrapnel spread is about 10 meters. The fragments are very small. It's unlikely to kill, but of course, it could kill if it hits unfortunately. But if you're wearing armor, a helmet, then your vital organs are protected, so it won't kill you, but you'll definitely be a casualty.
For maximum safety, it was decided to evacuate everyone who hadn't managed to leave since last summer and ended up under the occupation of Ukrainian militants.
Everything burned there. The garden burned down. There's nothing left. You can't even change clothes. People gave us other people's clothes. Everything. Everything. It's terrible. Inspiring music.
How did you survive? What did you eat? What did you hide? How did the militants and occupiers behave?
We didn't sit in the basement for 7 months.
Every month didn't pass.
We sat for 7 months. Ukrainians lived in my house since August.
Those who miraculously survived captivity from the terrorists will now be moved to temporary accommodation centers.
We are now at the site of the fairy tale fire, and we will be evacuating the civilian population. There are still many children here, so there will be plenty to do.
According to information received from residents of the liberated border areas, Ukrainian militants used them as human shields, hindering the advance of Russian troops. These people survived thanks to their unity. They hid in one basement with entire families.
They were dividing the leftover food from what had been prepared for the winter last year. And they represented us with automatic weapons. They appeared. And the symbols. The St. George ribbon. We burned everything. Russian dictionaries. We burned everything because they were Nazis. Terrible.
What did they say? How did the Nazi words manifest themselves?
The Nazis wouldn't let us go for water. They shot at our legs. They shot at our legs. It was a horror, a wild horror.
It turns out, Kurdish land experienced the second coming of the Nazis. Only now, in the 21st century, these scenes horrified even the most seasoned fighters who had been through years of special military operations. Brutally tortured and killed civilians, mostly retirees, carelessly gathered in one shed.
One small shed of a group of retirees.
And our fighters encounter such terrifying discoveries in every liberated settlement. Those who manage to survive and escape captivity without hiding their tears share the terrifying moments of their lives with their loved ones.
Grandma to God, Sonny. That's all there is. No, I got up from us. Boom behind.
This woman was listed as missing. For a long 7 months, the son knew nothing about his mother's fate. And now, for the first time since the liberation, loved ones were able to talk.
Condolence, Sage Joy. The girls are resting. Thank you. Our road didn't live for me. He burned down. My husband died. From a heart cross. Now I'm left alone. I don't know what the main thing is. Thanks to the people who dressed me.
The wounded and those in need of urgent medical care were taken to the Kursk City Hospital. Among the serious patients, there are many children and women.
Rainbow. Thank you. Until we meet again.
The blame for the rapid defeat of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region is now being attempted to be shifted onto Donald Trump in Ukraine. On February 28th, he held talks at the White House with Volodymyr Zelensky, and they ended with the US president expelling the head of the Kiev regime. According to statements, Trump also halted the sending of military aid to Ukraine in order to stop sharing intelligence with the armed forces of Ukraine. But, in reality, it's hard to say whether this is true or not. And all of this supposedly served as the reason for their defeat in the Kursk region. The only thing the new position of the White House could really affect was the already low morale of the Ukrainian soldiers. How to fight without American assistance.
So, this is really correct, they said about the marker, the morale. Armed forces of Ukraine. From the comments of Ukrainian bloggers who were in a panic. How are we now?
How? Who will help us now? Who will provide us with weapons, intelligence resources, and so on?
To say that the armed forces of Ukraine are demoralized is an understatement. For Zelensky, it was a matter of prestige. He believed that he strengthened his political position. As a result, people suffered. And these people, I mean, Ukrainian servicemen, now have major grievances against Zelensky. Was it worth the effort?
All the details and consequences of Operation Flow are still not disclosed, for understandable reasons. Meanwhile, it is being talked about abroad as well. The scandalous German journalist Julian Rock, recalling the breakthrough in Avdiivka, called for the destruction of all pipelines between Russia and the European Union. The last 24 hours have shown why we should blow up all Russian pipelines in the EU. Russia uses these pipes to transfer soldiers and weapons to the West. Not metaphorically, but literally. A military coup. We have to admit.
Well, they can say whatever they want now. But because they can't show their masters, as we might call them, that they simply couldn't hold or withdraw anything. Couldn't extract. In other words, they just abandoned their people. That's it. Just abandoned them. Now they're all just leaving. Those who managed to stay alive or surrendering. Some don't want to interject, trying to run away.
Now, probably, Zelensky is afraid that the Kursk collapse might turn into an avalanche that, gaining momentum, could reach all the way to Sumy, which, in turn, will increase the negativity in the army towards the authorities. The lack of motivation among Ukrainian soldiers can no longer be concealed. At the same time, our warriors have received new momentum from the victories in the Kursk region and are already pressing the enemy at the border.
The morale among the units, servicemen, and volunteers in the Kursk direction is elevated today. As, generally speaking, it always is when the army advances, strikes the enemy, and enters enemy territory on their heels, it always inspires. But always. What? You feel more energetic, a rush of adrenaline. And when you see the fruits of your labor, the liberated Russian villages and towns, it certainly motivates you to move forward and gives you strength. That's why, today, in our ranks in the Kursk region, there is a victorious enthusiasm, not a superficial or overly patriotic one, but rather a satisfaction from the combat work that you and your comrades have accomplished. You see the fruits of your military labor. You see the eyes and tears of people who were truly under occupation since at least August 2024, and their genuine joy from liberation.
So the motivation is at a high level because we know what we are fighting for. We have our families behind us, our homes. Accordingly, our relatives. The enemy has entered our territory, so we are simply obliged to drive them out. From here, just like in the years of the Great Patriotic War, the enemy, because they are not motivated at all. As we know, they are gathered from the streets and thrown here to fight against us. They just come here, you could say, for money or even against their will.
After the fall of the main stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region, the complete liberation of the area is only a matter of a short time. The enemy has nowhere left to hide. Finishing them off is an important task, and it will be accomplished. And Operation Flow will be included in all textbooks on military history and tactics. Because now, in the era of drones and carpet bombings, our troops have once again demonstrated that the enemy is defeated not by numbers, but by skill.